Hey, what's up, folks? Real Talk Japan, Steve Maddox here. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about what I call the fourth pillar of Japanese society and the Senpai-Kohai relationship. And I wanted to make this video because the purpose of the channel is to talk about Japanese society and life and the things that I've experienced. But fundamentally, so there's that. There's sort of the storytelling aspect of things, the sharing things that happened, which I find interesting. And I hope people will find them interesting when I tell them. But beyond that, you know, I want people who are thinking about coming to Japan or who are in Japan to learn from my mistakes. Because what I'm going to talk about today, the senpai-ko relationship, is it's probably the most fundamental aspect of Japan. It's core. It's an absolute core concept in Japanese society. And it's also the most difficult, I think, for Westerners, in particular Westerners, to understand. Because it's 180 degrees from, it's fundamentally 180 degrees different from the way that we live our lives, generally speaking, overall in the West. And so it's everywhere. And it's fundamental to Japanese society, and it's extremely difficult for Westerners to grasp, and it has a huge impact on your experience here. And I think if you understand it, because if I'd understood, what I was going through earlier on when I was working here in Japan, I would have had a much better experience. I can absolutely guarantee you that I wouldn't have made the mistakes that I made, and hopefully you won't make those same mistakes, and then hopefully maybe you'll have a better life here. Maybe that'll impact your decision about whether you want to stay here, whether you want to go home, whether you want to come here at all. So here's what it is. The senpai-kohai relationship, the senpai is literally, the kanji is literally the person who came before, and kohai is literally the person who came after. And senpai is above, kohai is below. And where do these relationships exist? Well, they exist everywhere. So in the home, older brother is senpai to younger brother. Parents fundamentally are senpai to children. And how it operates in the home individually there's probably some variety, but I've got a story about that I'll tell you here in a second, which kind of blew my mind. And then outside the home, any kind of social club in school, it exists for sure in schools in Japan. It's so fundamental that obviously exists in school. So students that are older are senpai to students who are younger. And if you're in a club and where kids are mixed together from different age groups, then the older students are senpai to the kohai, are above. They're in a dominant position over kohai, and fundamentally, and at work it's the same thing. So anybody who is senior to you is your senpai fundamentally. Anybody who is junior to you fundamentally is your kohai. And what that means is that senpai ultimately, fundamentally, has total control over kohai. Now there's a responsibility too. Traditionally the senpai's role is to teach kohai what to do and how to do their work. And so if you think about like in a farm or whatever, like in a rural community back traditionally, that'd make a lot of sense. I mean, somebody has to teach somebody how to do, how to grow food, right? So it would make sense in that environment. In the Japanese workforce, it operates basically the same way. Now, every company is different. Every situation is different. My understanding is that in the technology industry and in the science world, it's not nearly as rigid, or maybe doesn't really exist at all. Because part of having control over kohai is deciding what kohai is going to think. Now, I don't mean that in the sense that senpai sitting there thinking to himself like I want to figure out what this person is going to think. It's not like that. It's whatever senpai says goes. So if senpai says, we're going this way, then kohai says, yes, we're going this way. If senpai says, my opinion is X, kohai says, yes, I agree. In other words, expressing a different opinion is just simply not acceptable, generally speaking, in the senpai-kohai relationship. And so if you come to Japan, you come and you work in a Japanese company, or if you are working in a Japanese company, there's a very, very high probability that you're going to be in a senpai-kohai relationship with somebody. And from my experience, my guess is almost probably more often than not, you're going to be kohai. I mean, you're going to be kohai to somebody, right? And to what degree you'd have any sort of senpai responsibilities over somebody else, I mean, I don't know. It could depend on the company. My sort of personal expectation is probably not very highly likely. I was never in that position. In the 9 years that I worked here as an attorney, 5.5 years at a jewelry company, which we'll talk about. Almost 6-7 months at a construction company in Tokyo, which again was an interesting experience. And a year at a law firm here, where I was absolutely treated like kohai. I mean, I was absolutely treated like kohai, and nobody treated me like senpai. In each one of those cases, I was senpai to nobody. And I'm 56 years old, and when I came here 12 years ago, I was 44 years old. And when I first started working at the jewelry company, I was 45 years old. So I mean, I was older than a whole lot of people in the company, a lot of people, older than most, quite frankly, and nobody treated me like senpai. Absolutely nobody. So, I don't know what's it like to be senpai. What does it mean to be senpai? Quite honestly, I don't even really know. What I've told you is about what I know. What's it like to be kohai? Well, from the Japanese perspective, the way the Japanese live their lives is fundamentally kohai just obeys. So there's a dominance and an obedience aspect to it. So senpai is dominant, and kohai is obedient and subservient. And it's not just in work. It's not just in those instances too. The doctor-patient relationship is senpai-kohai. The dentist-patient relationship is senpai-kohai. And what does that mean? Well, you're not senpai in that situation. You're kohai in that situation. And so the way that you often interact with doctors and dentists in Japan is probably different from the way that you're used to. I mean, they don't have to give you information they don't want to. And it's often, my experiences, I've had some, good experiences with the medical system here. Very few bad experiences, a couple, but nothing that was really that bad. But the thing that does sort of stick out to me is just how often, you just kind of get ordered around, like the doctor just say, here's what we're going to do. And then it's not like it's a consultation, like it's an order that's given. And then you say, okay, I understand. And you do it. And I don't listen, it's health, so I don't necessarily feel like I have to obey kohai rules in Japan in that respect. But I certainly know that there's a cost if I don't, potentially a cost if I don't, like the doctor's going to get angry. And the nurse might get angry at you too, because you're not playing by the rules. I've had that experience actually one time. It was bad. So that's kind of sort of the general sort of structure of it. Now, when I was, I worked for about, a few months at a high school here. And this is where I first started to get it. So I worked for like 5.5 years at this jewelry company where it was awful because I was kohai to everybody and I didn't understand what that meant. I was hired as a lawyer, and I thought that meant that I was there to be a lawyer. And that meant, expressing my opinion and doing things that, finding mistakes and finding, potential risks and pointing those things out. That's what I thought my job was. And that absolutely was not my job. As kohai, you can't do that fundamentally. But I did those things every single day. And there were consequences every single day. And my life there got gradually worse and worse and worse as time went on. Because I kept doing it. And I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to do it. And then after I left the jewelry company, I worked for, and before I went to Tokyo and worked for the construction company, there was a period of about a year or so. And during that period, I spent a little bit of time working at a high school as a teacher. So not really a teacher, though. I didn't do any teaching. So I was only there for a few months. And then I went to Tokyo. But anyway, so one of the teachers, one of the English teachers came up to me one day in the teacher's room, and he's like, he had the textbook, and he showed me a story that was in the textbook about a golfer, an American golfer, and it was a story about the golfer and the caddy, and I don't remember I don't know what the grammatical point of the story was, or what the lesson was, but anyway, there was a scene in the story, and it was about their sort of buddy relationship and how they were close friends, and they had this this great relationship, whatever. And there's a scene there in the story about where the golfers, pitching onto the green or laying up, trying to get onto the green, approaching the green, and he reaches out of the golf bag and takes like the 7-iron or something like that, or the 6-iron or something like that. And he's about to line up the shot, and the caddy goes, "Wait, stop! That's the wrong one. You're gonna go, if you use that one, you're gonna go over the green, and you're gonna want to go into the water." And so the caddy stops him and hands him whatever the 8-iron or something like that, one shorter. And then the golfer goes, "Okay," and takes the shot, and he goes, just as the caddy said, lands right in the middle of the green, perfect shot, right? And so the teacher hands me the story, says, "Read the story." So I read the story, right? And then he goes, "How is this possible that the caddy would say no. Like how could that happen? And, explain to me how and why would a golfer let the caddy say no to him? And he said, look, the golfer is his boss, and the golfer pays his salary. So why would he allow the person, his employee, to say no to him? Why? And it was weird the way he put it. He was like, why would he allow him to say no to him? And I said, well, because that's his job. He's the caddy's job is to help the golfer around the course. And I don't know a lot about golf or being a caddy, but I mean, you kind of see whenever you watch golfing, you see that kind of thing a lot. They have a conversation where they're trying to figure out what's the distance, what's the shot, what iron do I use, whatever, what club do I use, whatever. You see that all the time, and I'm like, well, that's because that's his job. And he's like, but I don't understand that. And so he actually so then he and I said, listen, in the United States, that's we don't have relationships like that. I mean, employees can express their opinions. They can say what they can say no to their boss if they think the boss is wrong, and it happens all the time. People just sort of you could be in a meeting with a bunch of people, and floor is kind of open, and if somebody's somebody, an executive or whatever, is saying something that some other employee thinks is wrong or is factually wrong, or maybe there's a better idea, then you have sort of a competition of ideas. And generally speaking, ultimately there's a decision maker, but generally speaking, the best idea wins. And that's how we operate in the West. And there's no way I could never. He couldn't get it. He was like, that's just total chaos. And so he made me join him in his class and teach us, and explain this to all of his students. And he had 2 or 3 groups of students, or 2 or 3 classes, and had me explain to them. And then he had the students write an essay about whether they thought, which one they thought was better. Is the Japanese Sempai-Kohai way better, or is the American style free thinking kind of way better? And I don't remember the exact. I mean, I didn't take a poll or anything at the end, but I remember there was maybe 1 or 2 students who were like, I think the free thinking way is better. And when I get older and I join the workforce, I'm going to express my own opinions freely. I'm not going to let why should I accept some person's opinion just because he's older than me? Like that doesn't. I don't agree with that. And but pretty much everybody else universally was like, I get angry when my kohai, because all these kids were in. I think these were all second year students, I think. And so they were, as a second year student, they are kohai to the third year students, but senpai to the first year students. So they all have a kohai, right? And they like universally, the majority response was, I don't like it when my kohai says something different, disagrees with me, or says no to me, or I get really angry, and I don't put up with it. But maybe going forward, maybe I'll be a little bit nicer about it, something like that, right? So that's the extent of it, and that was when I first got it. Like when that was sort of a light went off my head at that moment, and I realized that it's to that extent. And I mean, I'd heard the word senpai kohai before, but I never understood it. And I had a general idea that these things exist in Japanese society, but I didn't know that I didn't realize that I was in a senpai kohai relationship with everybody else in the company. When I was working there, I didn't understand that. And I also didn't understand that I didn't have the right to say no or express opinions freely, because I did that every single day. I promise you I did. Every time I opened my mouth, I was expressing an opinion. And I even, I tried to explain to management, to the CEO and the other executives that that my role as a lawyer is to push the brakes. That's my job. And that, and this is how lawyers do their job. And this is what I'm supposed to do, and that's what I'm going to do. And they would just kind of and they just sort of freeze. And it was like, this is crazy. And the more that I did it, the worse it got. And it got pretty bad at the end, like really, 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 really bad at the end. So that's it. And so here's another story. So my wife and I, just to give you a sense of just how deep this can go. I said earlier that it also exists in the home and between siblings. And I don't know, I'm sure every family is different, but a few months ago, my wife and I were watching college football. There are highlights of a college football game, and it was a game where Indiana University was playing against some small school, and the starting quarterback, throws 5 touchdowns or whatever, 4 touchdowns, whatever. He's having a big game, and they're playing a weak opponent, and so the fourth quarter, at the end of the game, the second string quarterback comes in, and the second string quarterback is the first string quarterback's younger brother. And so I I point this out to my wife that hey, younger brother's in, and she says okay. And then the guy, he's a really good quarterback too. So he throws a touchdown, or makes a really nice play, scores I don't know, 2 touchdowns or something like that. And every time he made a good play, the younger brother made a good play, they'd show the older brother cheering wildly, like yeah, go get him, younger brother, whatever. And so they show this, and my wife just goes, "What the heck is that? Like, what? Why is he cheering?" I was like, "It's his younger brother. Of course he's cheering." And she's like, "That would never happen." She's like, "That would never happen in Japan. Like a Japanese, like a high school baseball team, for instance. If you had like the older brother goes out there and does well, and if the younger brother came in and also had success, like he would get bullied for sure. Absolutely, he'd get bullied for sure. But there's no way the older brother would put up with that. Now, is that true? I mean, I don't know. That was her opinion. To what extent does that happen in Japan? I mean, I have no idea. But the fact that she reacted that way, suggests to me it's probably pretty widespread and probably pretty accurate. Now, so even in the home, right? Even in the home, like you can't. I think it's really hard for us as Westerners to really fully understand just how deep this goes. I don't claim to understand it at all. But what I do know is that, like for instance, when I worked at the jewelry company, this is sort of how it would work. At work, is we would have we'd be in meetings, right? And you got the CEO there, or whatever, some executive there, and you got junior employees over here whose job basically was to give him information. So he would tell them to go gather information on XYZ and then come back and report, because they can't make any decisions on their own, right? He has to make the decision. So they'd get that information, and then we'd have a meeting where they would report that information to him, and then he'd make his decision. And then he'd say, okay, here's what we're going to do. Maybe he wants more information. He'd say, okay, go follow up on this, go follow up on that. Or, we're going to do this and we're going to do that, or whatever it is. He'd make the decision. And then the employees would go, I understand, wakarimashita. And then they would go on, and they would run back to the desk, and they would do exactly what they were told to do. So that's the nature of the relationship. So if you're kohai, fundamentally, that's what you're supposed to do. Now, to what extent, there's in different companies, to what extent that there's some room in there, like can you talk back, can you not talk back? I mean, I don't know. But another instance, my wife told me about she was at work, and her boss gave her some instructions to do something, and she wasn't really quite sure what he meant. And so she was kind of like, oh, I don't know, should I ask him? Should I ask him to explain it in more detail, because I wasn't really clear? And then she was like, no, I don't want to do that, because if I ask him a question, then he might think I'm criticizing him. Like it's like he might take it as if I'm telling him that he's not good at his job because I didn't understand it the first time, and so the way he explained it wasn't good enough. And so she's like, so I didn't do that. And so nowadays I just send an email back saying, like, this is what I'm going to do. Is that okay? As opposed to saying, please explain it again, because he might be offended by that. So another example, when I worked at a law firm, it's a Japanese law firm, here in Osaka, and they had developed, right when I joined the company, they had developed a diversity, equity, and inclusion policy, which is kind of funny. I don't care about any of that stuff, but it was just weird. And they had this policy. They called this their DEI policy, and they wanted me to translate it in English. So I did, and the content of it, though, I mean, obviously, it's not about having a diversity of. The purpose of the policy wasn't to say, we at this law firm, we have a bunch of different people from different nationalities. There's none of that. I don't think there was really anything like that in there. What it was about was diversity of opinion. And so what they said was that the unique thing about our law firm is that we allow associates to freely express their opinions to the partners, and that this was their new policy, to be more inclusive, right, to include more ideas, and but the way they put it was like there's a natural, they said, despite the fact there's a natural tension that's inherent in the relationship between senpai and kohai, basically. Despite that natural tension, meaning we take a more progressive approach to that. We allow them to express their opinions, which means previously they never did, right? It means previously in the Sempai-Kohai relationship in a law firm, whatever the partner said, the associate would have to obey. So I mean that's a statement of what the Sempai-Kohai relationship really is. And they were saying, well, we're gonna kind of loosen that up a little bit. But the tension is it's obedience, and then it's mastery and it's dominance, and included in that is a rigidness, like maybe a little bit of, I don't want to use the word bullying necessarily, because it's not really like that, but it's unyielding, right? It's unyielding, and you can't resist. It's fundamentally what it is. So so what does that mean for you? If you come to Japan, what does that mean for you? Well, I don't know, because I guess it all depends on your circumstances. But you have to understand. Number one, you have to understand that it exists, and that when you're here, if you're living here and you're interacting with Japanese people, you've got to understand that if you're in a relationship with that person, there's a very high probability that the other person thinks you're in a senpai-kohai relationship, and you're not senpai. Okay, and there'll be expectations that come along with that about how you behave, and if you don't meet those expectations, if you resist too much, let's say, right, if you disagree too much, there's a high probability there's going to be negative consequences. And my personal view is I think that this is probably the biggest reason why I think a lot of Westerners in particular who come to Japan struggle. Because they don't understand that's the nature of the relationship that they have at work with their superiors. They think it's okay to express opinions, try to make things better. You see an inefficiency, or you see something that doesn't make sense to you. You're like, hey, why is that? Or why do you do it that? Well, in America we do it like this, or this seems like a more efficient way of doing things, and then it doesn't happen, right? Because senpai, your boss, is not going to take your advice on that. And then you're going to get frustrated and be like, I don't understand. Like I just gave that guy a really good idea, that person a really good idea, and I got nothing. And now I'm even more angry. And that's because, you're in a senpai-core relationship, and that's how these things work. So is that avoidable? I mean, I don't know. It depends on your personality. My view is that highly compliant personality types tend to do a lot better in Japan. And I think tend to have better experiences in Japan. I'll give you a couple examples. So at the jewelry company, there was a woman. When I joined the company in 2015, there was a woman there who was in her early 50s, I think, who basically well, there wasn't a legal group there, but she and her husband were there, and they did all the legal work, and they were a team. And she was probably like in her maybe early 50s, something like that. And when she joined the company, she'd been there at that point like about 10 years. So when she joined the company, she was probably in her early 40s. Now, the CEO joined the company in 2000, and he was 30 years old. He's the same age as me. He's 1 year younger than me. So she was older than him, and I think that she viewed herself as his senpai. That's just sort of the general sense that I got from what happened afterwards. But regardless, she was not a high compliance personality. She was very much not that. And I think the reason the CEO hired her at the time was because they were trying to expand into the U.S. and they actually had a store there that went bankrupt for reasons that had nothing to do with her or him really. They got bad legal advice ultimately, and bad legal planning. But anyway, so I think he hired her because he felt like he probably needed, they had plans to expand, and they had lots of domestic legal issues and stuff like that. And she's not a lawyer, never been to law school. Her husband's not a lawyer, never went to law school. They didn't have law schools back then. But neither one of them passed the bar exam. So these are two people who simply had knowledge about the law to some degree or another. And so they were delegated the tasks of doing whatever legal work came up. And so anyway, so she was there, and when I joined the company, there was another guy who was also technically in the legal group. Like his name was on the org chart, but he didn't sit with us, and I didn't know who the guy was. And what had happened was the year earlier, he'd hired this young guy right out of law school, who did have a law degree and did pass the bar exam. And he was like whatever 25, 26 years old or whatever. And and he did that, I think, for two reasons. One was because this woman, this older woman, was really seemed to be really resistant. Like she'd put up a fight about everything. She wanted to be in charge of everything. In other words, she wasn't acting as Kohai. And that was, I mean, and I sort of saw that with my own eyes, and I didn't really understand what was going on. But she just resisted everything, and she would sort of like take control of things, and she wouldn't share information all the time, you know, like, and she would just sort of do things on her own, without asking for permission, which is not what you're supposed to do as Kohai. Now, I didn't know that at the time, but I think he didn't like that. Obviously, he didn't like that. She was a very non-compliant kind of person. This young guy is an extremely high compliance individual, like extremely high compliance. So he knew that hiring him would make his life a lot easier because he would just deal with him, and he was going to place him above her in the hierarchy, and that's exactly what he did. And then she got angry and then stopped coming in, and then ultimately quit because she didn't want to work under this guy. So anyway, so that's an example of like a very low compliant person being replaced by a very high compliant person. Now, I was also a very low compliant person. I mean, I didn't know that I was being low compliant. I mean, I thought I was doing what I was supposed to do, but I was a very low compliant person, and I had tons of problems. Like every day was hard. Every day was hard. And so there you have it. So maybe the key to success in Japan is being high compliant. I don't know. Another example. Back when I joined the company, there was when I joined the jewelry company in 2015. At the same time, they hired a group of like 4 or 5 Americans to work in the factory. And their job, they basically, I think most of them worked in either on the manufacturing side where they actually were making the jewelry, or they were in the purchasing side where they were dealing with suppliers. I think most of them were on the purchasing side. But these 4 or 5 Americans, they were all fluent. Like they're all like really, 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 really fluent. Like they'd been studying Japanese like, you know, since high school or maybe even earlier than that. And I think they all came from the English teaching world and did that for a few years. They didn't want to do that anymore, and so they transitioned over into this company. And all nice people, really, really nice people, all Americans. And they were all gone within 2 years. All of them were gone. And I remember like one of them right before we left. You know, we were chatting, whatever. Like he came by the head office where I was, because the factory is a different building. So I didn't see these people very often at all. But anyway, he came over to say goodbye, basically, and he was just like, it was awful, just awful for all of us. Like we were all just beating our head against the wall. Like we had all these great ideas about like how to make things better, more efficient, and you know, and they just had no idea how to use us, you know, to be effective, to be good employees, and so it's just a waste of time. And so yes, everybody left. And so in other words, like these folks were fluent. They'd studied Japanese for a long, long time. They'd been in Japan for a long, long time, and they didn't understand it either. They had no idea. They had no idea that they were supposed to be Kohai in those situations and what that meant. So I'm absolutely certain they knew the words Senpai and Kohai, but they had no idea what it meant, and they had no idea how to be Kohai. So if you're going to come here, or if you are living here now, my best advice to you is to figure that out. Figure out whether you need to be compliant, whether the problems that you're having at work, if you're having problems at work or in other places in your life, is it because of that? Is it because you're in a Sempai-Kohai relationship that you don't understand? And if so, then you know my recommendation is make a strategy to make it better, so you're not beating your head against a wall. And then hopefully then you'll have a better experience. So anyway, we'll leave it there today, and we'll see you again sometime soon. Thanks.